Thank you very much. This actually is April 25th at 11 o'clock Central Time. We have a topic that's actually very beneficial in looking at problem solving in crop production as well as manure handling. And I want to present it in those contexts of where that's coming from. This is called the 3 stages of anaerobic conditions. And when we look at the 3 stages of the anaerobic conditions, we really are looking at understanding that so we can end up being a lot wiser in our crop production. I really don't care if I'm a dairy operation or not even a livestock operation. I think that this is very relevant. Tie this together to crop production and manure management, that makes sense. So we're going to start in right away with what we are going to talk about, the 3 stages to start with, because it is important as we get through this that we understand the fundamentals. I find that most of the people do not understand the word anaerobic in these 3 aspects. When I use the aspects word or the stages word, I'm probably trying to interchange the 2 different words for the same scenario, but I'm also trying to identify it in a way that most of the people understand it. When you look at stage 1, it is a condition without oxygen. First of all, the word anaerobic is talking without oxygen. So that is stage 1. Anything can become into an environment. Let's just look out in the fields and let's just take a rain, for example. We had an inch of rain in about, I'm going to say 30 minutes of time or less, maybe 20 minutes. And out there, the soils are completely wet, except for the most fertile, well-structured soils. They are simply water-sodden, immediately water-sodden. Well, the reality is the rainwater brought a little oxygen in it. Believe it or not, the first 10 or 15 minutes, it is not even anaerobic since the rainwater brought extra oxygen. But it truly is what it says, and that is, by definition, an area or an environment that does not have oxygen. That field out there that's completely water-sodden wet, completely wet all the way up to the outside of the soil, that is water-sodden. So at that moment in time, in about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how much carbon dioxide is being exhausted from the environment inside the soil, such as every beneficial aerobic microorganism, 70% of their manure is literally CO2 anyhow, which is twice as heavy as oxygen. So within 15 to 20 minutes, that area that's completely water-sodden is now without oxygen. So we could call that example as stage 1, the anaerobic condition as stage 1. Is that harmful? No. It's not necessarily. It depends how long. If it soon becomes able to soak in the water and it soaks away, automatically, all of a sudden, it opens up pore spaces for oxygen and atmospheric air to be in, and then it will quickly restore itself back to an aerobic condition. What I'm trying to describe is this. All soils need to be textured or have the tilth of soil or be well structured. Those words are all trying to describe the same thing, where there's space for air and water to move throughout the soil particles. They can be flat as a pancake with no space between the soil particles and be very tightly compacted, or they can be very well structured or very tilthy and or the ability for it to have a lot of water and air moving in that soil, and that's what we would call well-structured or tilthy soils. Those will restore back to oxygen. Within minutes, the water moves on through, and there you go. Now you're back to your aerobic condition. That temporary anaerobic or condition without oxygen, without a lot of time, is no big deal, no harm done, nothing went wrong. It's just literally describing stage 1, and that is without oxygen. Stage 2, however, is enough time of stage 1 where the microorganisms that can only eat and sleep and divide and multiply, take in energy, do their thing, those microbes that do not have to have oxygen, that like to actually be in an environment where there is no oxygen, they will multiply quickly, very quickly. Within days, hours and days, I should say, those microorganisms are starting to kick in gear. Now all of a sudden the anaerobic microorganism community is thriving well. It's eating, taking in energy, it's putting out energy, it's putting out carbon monoxide, it's creating an anaerobic environment of gases. And in this particular condition, that's how weeds love to grow, by the way. But those microorganisms that do not like to eat with any oxygen, so they love to thrive. So, within a day or two, the microorganism population has exploded to well over 1 billion-fold from what it was. Totally out of control. Now that's stage 2 anaerobic condition. And if you look at stage 2 anaerobic condition, what we're trying to help everyone understand in that context is now things start to go the other direction. Why? Because there are organisms out there that actually end up becoming less beneficial to plant root growth and more beneficial to pathogen growth. So now all of a sudden, the microorganisms that do not want oxygen, that are pathogenic, they start multiplying very, very fast. Let me describe what I'm talking about. So, for example, Rhizoctonia, or in orchards, it could be blackline. It could be all kinds of different things coming from an anaerobic decomposition. When you look at that condition, when long enough, and it's always, well, how long is it? Well, that's just extremely different for every piece of ground that you got. Could be different for every 10 feet across your field. But the bottom line is, conceptually, I want you to believe and understand stage 1 is harmless. Stage 2 is where we start promoting bad things happening, such as vomitoxin in corn, such as alpha toxins, such as all kinds of negative anaerobic conditions in small grain, or you name it, Fusarium, Phytophthora, Pythium. There are so many different pathogenic diseases. If we could just keep that stage 2 from happening, we could keep those diseases at bay. And then we've got stage 3, that decomposition cycle. Or that environment is stage 1 plus stage 2, long enough that stage 3 now exists, which is very, very amazing. And that is the condition where the minerals actually end up gaining a substance or a condition, if you will, where those microorganisms end up taking away the oxygen from all minerals around the microorganisms, and now those minerals attach themselves to hydrogen. An example is sulfur. Sulfate is 4 parts of oxygen to 1 sulfur. Sulfide is 2 parts of sulfur to 1 hydrogen. So when the oxygen is deprived long enough, The O part of the SO4 for sulfate. Sulfates is 4 parts of oxygen. SO4, 4 parts of oxygen. The O gets away from it, and now it's only got the H, or hydrogen. Now all of a sudden it goes from sulfate to sulfide. And sulfide, chloride, all of these other things that's got the hydrogen attached to it means now the mineral is anaerobic. Now, the mineral being anaerobic and it gets into crop production can cause all kinds of sick plant issues. That anaerobic condition, stage 3, is a major deal in crop production. Many people do not understand this. And they fight this. Well, I got to have a fungicide. I got to have this, and I got to have that, and I got to have this issue because I got this struggle. When they really have an environmental issue where they have the wrong environment gone from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. Because once you get in that stage, you cannot produce a healthy crop. I would like to give a little story. I feel like stories are the best way to keep something relevant and memorial. I had a partner of mine down in Missouri in a compost operation years ago. His name is Larry. One time I had him go with me to another customer down in South Louisiana. When we were down there helping on the sugarcane growing cycle, we happened to learn of this compost operation. So we went over to that place, which was probably a couple hours away, and visited this compost operation. Now, this man was very proud of his composting operation. He's getting stuff to turn black to looking like soil, and he's pretty happy. Has a few odor issues and a lot of flies and fleas and all kinds of insects. So we knew he's losing all kinds of things up in the air. We now know, obviously, that oxidation and evaporation is the composter enemy. And that's said with a lot of truth in it, more than most people understand. That being said, so now the bottom line is, when you look at how that all works, we have a condition here that's just setting this thing up, right? Well, he's got this composter's pretty happy with making things go black, and he's having sales. People want to come and get it. Doesn't sell it for much. I think he was getting $5 or $8 a ton. Wasn't getting a lot for it, but making a lot on the tipping fees. Pretty excited with his enterprise. Pretty proud of what he's doing, and he has this planter outside his office, and he's growing vegetables. Well, I put 2 and 2 together as I walked up with the odors and stuff and looking at it and so on, not saying anything to my partner Larry. I knew that anything that's grown in that kind of compost is probably going to have stage 3 decomposition cycle, meaning I got minerals attached to hydrogen, stage 3 anaerobic condition. So as we got done with our visit, we were going out to, he's proudly saying, see, we grow vegetables directly in our compost, and it's doing pretty well. And these vegetables were there. He had carrots, and he had, I'm trying to remember, he had lettuce, carrots, some sugar peas, and some tomatoes, and something else. His tomatoes didn't look very well at all. They were struggling. And his carrots were not doing just too bad from what you could look at. And he just pulls out a carrot and says, hey, you guys, why don't I give you a carrot? Picks up another one and washes it, starts chewing on his carrot, and he gives us one. Offered us both of them first, and I declined it and gave Larry one. And so we took it and washed it, and Larry took a bite of it while we were yet there and chewed a little bit, and his thoughtful expression on his face just made me want to laugh. I knew what was coming. I had too much experience with this already. But I said nothing, and then he kind of turns around and he slowly spits that particle out of his mouth and just kind of continues to visit and carries the carrot into the car. As we left, says, man, that's the most bitter carrot I've ever eaten in my life. I said, sure. It's got the sulfites in it, or it's got the minerals with hydrogen in it. That's why. I can easily understand that. And in the first part of growing that, before it decomposes further in that planter, it's going to grow something, but it's going to end up having bitter taste to it. Well, he says, that's the most bitter carrot I've ever eaten in my life. And I says, yes. And if you would do a lot of it over time, it would cause cancer. I believe it with all my heart. And so in the end, that was the kind of discussion we had. Well, I'm relating that experience to just give you a little bit of a taste of what this really means when I talk about stage 3 anaerobic condition. So when we look at that side of it, that's just giving you an example. So now imagine that I've got 1,000 acres that I'm farming in the Midwest, and I'm looking at listening to Edwin, and I'm looking at being just a grain farmer, and I'm going to give you several examples in the livestock as well. But I'm in a grain farming business, and I go out there, and I've got my soils not too badly drained, pretty well drained, I would say, at least on the surface drainage. But I do find that I don't have really a good tilthy soil. If I dig in my soil, when it's dry especially, it's so hard I can hardly dig it. I have to chip at it. When I have rain, I get a lot of runoff. So yeah, I've got good drainage, but by the way, I don't have soil pore space. I don't have the ability to soak water in. And that's over time. And I'm speaking of many, many, many examples here. You follow what I'm saying? And when you look at those examples that I'm giving you, those examples are simply this, that we really have to look at knowing your soils really well. And the reason I say knowing your soils really well is because that is, if it doesn't soak in water, that means it doesn't have open pore space, air and water to pass through your soil. So in that particular condition, when you get this condition, not only does it go to stage 1 because it fills up what little space there is, it stays that way until it gets to condition 2. And in an extended period of time of rain, it doesn't take long for that to get to stage 3. Now we got issues of aflatoxin. We got issues of growing this. We require a lot more nitrogen to grow the same amount of bushels per acre of corn. We do all kinds of interesting things that we normally don't have to do simply because we got nature working against us. We don't have pore space. What is pore space? P-O-R-E. That open space in the soil. We have to magnetically and biologically provide a condition that forces the soil particles of the platelets to stand end on face and face on end and end to end, not flat as pancakes stacked up, but on edge. That is a space for air and water to pass through. So this is about soil structure or soil tilth in an anaerobic condition that happens momentarily. It never goes to stage 2. It never goes to stage 3 if we have a very tilthy, well-structured, loose type of soil. And you can say to yourself, yeah, my soils just tend to be tight, but that's our type of soil. You know, I really don't agree with that statement, and I want to really kibosh that thought in a nice way, in a very respectful way, simply to say, not sure how many people have heard us talk about the sticky red clay soils in Lancaster County that had regular compost on it for approximately 16 years. And I was out there in 2010 walking the fields, and it had 0.2 of an inch of rain the night before, and it was building up in this sticky red clay soil, was building up on my shoes. It was a 1/4 to 1/2 an inch thick under my shoes, at least 3/4 to an inch of soils on the outside edge of my shoes, and I was walking stiff-legged, just trying to stay upright. It was slick, and I said, boy, your soil does not have very good structure. This is before these people actually understood soil structure, and they said to us, they looked at us a little bit, then finally one of them, it was a father-son operation, finally one of them got up the nerve and said, well, but Edwin, you need to understand, we have sticky clay soils. It's not like Illinois soil at all. We don't have your nice black tilthy soils. We got very sticky red clay type soils. It's never been different than that. And they've been putting on manure prior to that for about 40 years prior to doing 16 years worth of compost. And my answer to them was this: you know what? I understand this is naturally a very red, sticky clay soil, but please understand we have to structure and cause this heavy soil, heavy clay, sticky type soils to become loose, to become flocculated, to become able to have pore space. We still have to have clay do that, because if we don't, we're in deep trouble. This is never going to work long term. All right, well, not much they could do about that. They really said nothing, and I believe that they said, well, you just don't understand our area. And that always makes me smile, because I have been into literally thousands of farms all across the world. I've seen about every soil condition imaginable, from highly erodible, very light soils. In fact, so light soils, the one farmer told me one time, the only reason that this soil is here is to hold the state of Florida onto Georgia. It's just a connecting piece. It's got not even 0.1% cation exchange capacity, and less than that organic matter. It's just white beach sand. And yeah, I understand all that. All the way to extremely heavy soils that are so heavy they are just impossible to work with when they got wet, and so on. So with all of these things, I'm just wanting to make the comment that in 2 years using humus compost, they had that soil loose, and in an event in the summer of 2012, 2 years later, they had 8.5 inches of rain. Yes, I said that right, 8.5 inches of rain. And in that condition, the following day, they walked out there without boots, never got muddy shoes, a little bit of soil stained on their shoes and on their hands, but very little, and it was nice and crumbly, granulated type soils down to 6 inches deep. The water did not run off of that field. It was beautiful. It was very tilthy, texturous, well-structured soil. And then the neighbors said, what it costs, but we want what you got. And he built a business that just boomed fast because the people wanted to repeat that type of loose soil. And again, this all came out of the 3 stages of anaerobic decomposition to give you an example of what can happen, and so on and so forth. So many people say, well, that does not apply to me. Oh, yes, it does. There isn't a firm in operation in existence that those 3 factors do not impact. I'm going to make a bold statement to the point where the bottom line is actually impacted. The P&L statement is impacted. Why? Because the tighter the soil, the greater the amount of fertilizer is required. The tighter the soil, the greater the amount of solutions, the sides, etc., is required. The tighter amount of soil requires a higher amount of cost of production for a lower level of production. Those are bad things. They are going against making and helping a farmer thrive. And so from my perspective, this is very relevant. I'm going to switch gears slightly to a livestock operation. And the reason I want to do that is I want to make sure that we are talking about something that's relevant to the people that listen on this call. But more importantly, there are many grain operations that get benefited from operations around them that have livestock. And so we need to look at this and look at this very carefully. When you think about what we got, we really need, very badly need to have a function, an understanding function of manure management. So people have pits. That gets into all three conditions. People have deep bedded pack. That can get into all three conditions. People have just feedlots and they have scraping system. That gets into all three anaerobic conditions potentially. But in every one of those cases, not one of them has to get to stage 3. Not a single one. And so we have solutions to keep from going there. This call is going to only briefly mention our solutions. You will need to get further information to go deeper on this and talk with one of our representatives to figure that out on your specific deal, but I'll give you some examples. We have a biological that we can put with the manure that is facultative in nature, meaning the microorganisms do very well with oxygen or without oxygen. Yet those microorganisms do not allow the pathogenic microorganisms to thrive, nor do those microorganisms produce, in a condition without oxygen, anything that ends up bad for crop production. So in either case, it is conditioning the manure to make it much more beneficial. That's an exciting opportunity for those handling manure. There are so many different potential operations out there that are benefiting from what I'm talking about. And in the end, that manure becomes very beneficial, requiring a lot less fertilizer, additional nitrogen, etc., to complement the manure system. And so odors are no longer an issue. There are many other factors of handling the manure. Of course, composting your solid manure allows your volume to be much less. That's a benefit, but that's just a tiny benefit of the many other ancillary benefits that go with it. And so in every condition of livestock production, I have not found one arena in all the different places that I've been involved with. Again, whether it's flush systems, whether it's scraping systems, whether it's conditions of pits or deep bedded pack or outside storage, I really don't care what system you have. We've got something that helps make that more useful for the soil. And in the end, our whole goal as a company is to enhance the lives of others, increasing life in the soil, and turning waste into assets. And so what we want to do is help people benefit with what they have and where they're going. And let me just pull back up to 30,000 foot level, and then I'll open it up for questions and so on and so forth. I would just like to make sure that you go looking at this from a 30,000 foot level. I do not know what all factors that you have, but from a big picture point of view, if you understand those 3 anaerobic conditions, we will be able, and you will be able yourself, to understand much better how to deal with that kind of a scenario going forward. I would really want you to know that going forward, you make this work for yourself because you know what to do about it. So yes, you have to have more sugar granulated type of soil structure. So that requires looking at something like humus extract applications during the summer and a small amount of fall and spring applications of humus compost perhaps. Maybe it's only using supercharged compost, or maybe it's you can only use your manure that you just treated. In every condition, you have an opportunity to increase your soil structure by never working soils too wet, etc. And so big picture, 30,000 foot view is once you understand what this cause and effect process in nature really is, you can really most beneficially try to make so that your system is financially. And so that's kind of what I had in my talk here to kind of tie this all together. Hopefully that was helpful. Are there any questions that we would like to talk about? And go ahead and ask those. That time is right now. Anyone? If you happen to be muted, press *1. That will unmute you. If you're talking and we're ignoring you, that means that you are muted. So if you want to press *1, it'll mute you the first time. It will unmute you the second time. It's a toggle switch. *1 is a toggle switch to turn on and off your mute. So in the end, if you have a question, just unmute yourself and then we'll go from there. All right. Well, I don't see any questions flying in. I guess that's fine. I just wanted to wish everyone a very blessed day. I just hope that this helps one really manage it and looking at its overall crop management and or livestock manure management program that sometimes are not evident in where they all come from. And so these are just simply ways to educate ourselves. I find this need so often that it's just very, very important that people understand this type of anaerobic conditions. Therefore, you can have a much better life yourself. Have a wonderful, blessed day, everyone.